coming to a home near you. Did you know there could be a silent killer in your very home? Brought to you by the people that brought you bitterness and family strife. It's Unforgiveness, the silent killer.
Let's get into that. Before we jump into today's episode, we just wanted to share a few things with you. First, we'd like you to like this episode and then subscribe to our podcast. If you're doing that on YouTube, also hit the bell notification so that you know when we post anything new. And then share this with somebody that you feel like this would be beneficial for.
That's right. If you would like to support our show further, we would welcome that. You are welcome to do that at anchor.fm/marriagebydesign to check out your options for supporting the program financially. Otherwise, guys, the links to our social media are always in the description of every video, so feel free to check those out there. And now, let's get to the show.
My name's Nathan Warnock.
I'm Andrea Warnock, and you've joined us for Marriage Monday on the Marriage by Design podcast.
Yeah.
And I don't know who I have sitting next to me, but it's not who it usually is.
It's Nathan Warnock.
Oh, it's his Chimo voice.
Whoa.
Okay, so Marriage Monday is a time where we usually talk to you about God's design for marriage, what the Bible has to say about marriage, and how we live that out practically. But today, I don't know, is a movie trailer or Nathan's going rogue.
Yeah, I might have a future career in movie reading.
You don't.
Okay, great. Well,
but I believe in you. I believe in you. It can happen.
Wait, no, you don't. We are going to talk a little bit about a story in the Bible that I think is really insightful when we think about what unforgiveness looks like and what the consequences of unforgiveness truly are. And we've talked on this channel before about bitterness and unforgiveness. Sure. But this isn't just about what bitterness and unforgiveness does to you. We want to talk a little bit about what bitterness and unforgiveness does to those around you. And really we're talking in the context of, what happens when those around you, your friends, your family, what happens when you allow them to be exposed to maybe the worst moments of your own marriage, right? What happens when you allow them to be exposed to those parts of your spouse that, maybe are really grating on you or aren't God honoring or are just downright ugly? And when we share those things outside of our marriage, it can have some unintended consequences with regards to those relationships around us. And there's a biblical story that actually highlights this exact thing. And so that's what we want to talk a little bit about today. Is there anything you want to set up on, this whole idea of, what situations are we talking about here?
With unforgiveness and all that sort of thing?
Yeah, like, because we're not necessarily in this episode talking about your unforgiveness towards me. We're talking about your maybe unforgiveness towards me that has gotten out to those around you, right? So, what kind of situations does that come up?
So, are you talking about kind of what I was saying earlier?
Yeah.
So, when Nathan and I went through some really hard times in our marriage, and there were, so if you don't know our story, lots of things had been happening and on both of our ends, but Nathan, I have a really hard time saying it because I have a hard time saying it because it makes it sound like it's all your fault, and it wasn't. But anyway, Nathan had cheated on me, and this one particular situation was in 2012, and he was having a sexual affair with somebody that he was working with, and it had gotten to a point where it was like very known because he was just choosing to live in that and go forward with that. And so there were some people that I worked with and some friends that had known about it. Anyway, fast forward quite a bit of time where we had reconciled, I had forgiven him, we had moved on, and
we had children.
We had had more children since then. And some of those people that had known about it and who were kind of invested in it, in the situation when it happened, and were concerned about me and all that sort of thing, could never forgive Nathan and took up an offense on my behalf, I guess, is the way that they were thinking about it, against Nathan, and could never let that go. Even though I was the one who was in that particular situation wronged and had chosen to forgive and reconcile, they just couldn't give it up. And that seems crazy to me. I mean, it seemed crazy to us back then, but it's crazy to me to think, like, this wasn't you didn't have a horse in this show. Why are you even involved in it, really? And beyond that, the person who was wronged has chosen to forgive. Why can't you? That's so bizarre. And so, how many of those situations happen in our own world or around us or whatever? There's tons of people that we know, and maybe even situations that we've experienced, that there was a wrong and somebody's holding on to it, and they maybe a wrong against them, sure, or maybe just a wrong that happened, and they just have a bitterness towards that person.
Right.
Oh, this person did this, which was a horrible thing, and I'm just gonna hold on to that bitterness against that person.
Yep.
For what reason?
Right. And so as we think about this, we like to bring it back to the Bible. And Andrea, in her Bible study group, has been studying the back part of this story. And so I wanted to summarize the story of Jacob and Esau very briefly. And we actually did an episode, a Family Friday episode, about what we can learn from the story of Jacob and Esau.
Yeah.
And so I'll link to that here in this video if you're watching it on YouTube. Otherwise, you can go and just search Esau, ESAU, on our website. That's marriagebydesign.podbean.com. And you'll be able to find that episode. So, in summary, Jacob's one of the founding fathers of our faith, the Christian faith. His story, at least the portion between he and Esau, can be found in Genesis chapter 25. And Esau and Jacob, Esau was the older, Jacob was the younger. And Jacob was more of the homebody, Esau was more of the hunter-gatherer type. And Esau was his father's favorite. And
Jacob was his mother's favorite.
Yep, Jacob was his mother's favorite. And so during the course of that story, Jacob actually tricks Esau out of his blessing. So in Jewish culture, the blessing was a big deal. It was basically the mantle of patriarchy passing from one generation to the next. It was a big deal. And so when Jacob stole that, and he outright stole it, then took advantage of his dad, who was elderly and couldn't see very well, and just outright stole the blessing. Obviously, Esau responded by threatening Jacob's life, and Jacob went on the run.
Yep.
And over the course of time, the story just sort of ends for Esau at that point, and then follows Jacob, because Jacob's ultimately going to be the founding father, really the father of the tribes of Israel. And so it leaves off with Jacob on the run for his life. Esau is going to kill him, and that's where it leads off, until you get a few chapters later to chapters 32 and 33 of Genesis. And what we see in chapters 32 and 33 is Esau is going to catch up with Jacob down the road sometime. And Jacob's going to be scared for his life. Mm-hmm. And Esau's going to forgive him for all the wrong that Jacob had caused, and there's going to be a reconciliation of that relationship, and then they're going to go their separate ways, because at this point Esau was the leader of a whole tribe of people called the Edomites, and Jacob, of course, had his I think had 11 of the 12 kids that he would have, or maybe all 12, and with Rachel and Leah, and he was kind of doing his thing, and so the two came together, there was reconciliation, and then they separated out. And so we look at that and go, well, this is great, right? There's reconciliation there. They're going to leave as brothers. There's forgiveness. This is exactly what us Christians ought to be doing. We give forgiveness, and then we move on with our lives.
But crazy enough, that's not the end of the story, because you fast forward to Numbers 20, and we see that's not the end.
Flip over there. Let's see, Numbers at the end of the Bible, right?
No.
Okay.
So this is... Yeah, you move on to Numbers 20, and what's happened is that the Israelites were slaves in Egypt, and God told Moses that he was going to help the Israelites escape from their slavery in Egypt, escape from Pharaoh, and Moses was the leader of that.
Right, and for context's sake, this is about 500 or so years after Jacob and Esau reconcile. Right. So this isn't like a
Jacob
few weeks
and
later.
Aren't still around,
this is Jacob's dead, Esau's dead, several generations of Edomites and Israelites dead. Israel's grown from those 15 people to millions. Edomites similarly have grown to a large people, but we're generations removed, 500 years removed, and that's where this story picks up.
So God does miracles, brings them out of Egypt. Moses is leading them. They're wandering in the desert for 40 years. And we're now reaching the time where the Israelites are going to start really moving towards the promised land, the land that God promised them that they would dwell in. And they're really starting to move towards that. Moses is still leading them, and they come upon... God has told them, you're going to move across these lands and you're going to overtake them, or you're going to have these lands.
Right. Whatever people are there, I'm going to bless you with regards to defeating those people.
Right.
Right. So that we're in Numbers 20, the back half, 14 through 21. And the Israelites are going to try and move through, and wouldn't you know, who's going to be standing in between the Israelites and the land of Canaan,
which is where they were promised?
You guessed it.
The Edomites.
The Edomites.
Dun, dun, dun.
And, yeah.
Oh, my gosh. No, not that voice.
Oh, well, I thought
dun,
that
was...
Dun is better. I thought we were doing a movie thing there. So the Israelites are going to go to the Edomites and go, hey, let us pass. And the Edomites are going to go, no.
Right, and, which God was just... It could have been just, you don't have to take over the people. You can just pass through.
Right. And the Israelites were not looking for a fight here.
Right.
They were just trying to get through. And at least the way it's written in Numbers 20, there seems to be, to me, some indication that they remembered the connection that they had to the Edomite people.
For sure.
But no matter what, they offered them, potentially gifts, and there was some negotiation, and the Edomites were going, no, and if you come here, we're going to kill you. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, there's going to be conflict between Israel and the Edomites, and the question is, why? And when we think about this story, it becomes clear from the discussion of Israel's relationship and battle with the Edomites that while Esau had offered forgiveness and reconciliation to Jacob, the message never made its way from Esau to the rest of his people. And so...
Or they just chose to continue on with their taking up an offense.
So you can look at even that sort of Far Eastern, Middle Eastern, Far Eastern culture, even to this day, and it's heavily honor driven. So, if you besmirch my family name, I'm going to hold that against you for ages, right? And in the West, we've sort of become much more flippant with those things where it's like, you know, we just kind of let these things go. Not always, right? If you saw that show that came out, I don't know, 8 or 9, 10 maybe years ago, the Hatfield and McCoys, it was a good little series on what happens when families hold grudges forever. And that happened right here in the good old US of A. But in these Eastern lands, this idea of honor bound to offenses has a much bigger impact. And so the Edomites are carrying around this offense against the Israelites for 500 years. That is incredible to think about, allowing a grudge to fester for that long. And ultimately, it's going to cost the Edomites in lives, because God's not going to give them victory against the Israelites, and they're ultimately going to face the wrath of God because of the way they treated the Israelites. And the saddest part about that is it didn't even have to be.
Yep.
Because the leader of the Edomites didn't have a grudge against the Israelites anymore, but for whatever reason that never got passed on down. So, you know, what we're wanting to do here today is offer you that story, and I gave you the references so you can go have a look yourself, and I encourage you to do that. But I want you to think about your own life, right? What unforgivenesses do you have, or have you had in your own life? Maybe it's, as Andrea shared earlier, maybe it's that your spouse has done some things to you that they shouldn't have done, that were wrong, and you're carrying around an offense against them for those things. Maybe you have children that have committed offenses against you, and you're carrying around unforgiveness for those offenses. Unforgiveness in and of itself is not God-honoring. Right. We're asked, I mean, Jesus' disciples asked him point blank, how many times should we forgive? And what did he say?
7 times 70.
Right. They said even 7 times. And he said not 7 times, but as Andrea said, 7 times 70, right? This idea of, countless times, time after time after time after time after
like,
time.
Are you
after
really
time.
going to keep a record?
And his point is, forgiveness is the desired state of our Creator, right? I mean, his desire is to forgive us our debt. That's why he sent Jesus down to earth, and why Jesus himself was willing to come down to earth, rejecting the divine to become merely human, in order to offer us an opportunity for forgiveness before an all-holy God. And that's what God did for you and me. And man, aren't we glad that he did when we think about our own lives? And yet, how often are we to hold even the smallest offense against someone in our lives when God has made a path for holding no offense against us in all of the offenses we commit against him?
Yeah, I mean, how many of us know the Lord's Prayer? Forgive us as our debts as we forgive our debtors, or forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us.
Right.
It's part of the Lord's Prayer. Like, the greatest example was the Lord, and we need to offer that forgiveness to other people. Our only response to a sin that's been committed against us, or an offense or anything, our only response is as believers, is to forgive, because anything else is sin.
That's right.
I just had that conversation with one of our kids the other day, because that child was struggling with being hurt by a sibling. And I said, well, you can either choose to forgive, or you can choose to hold on to that, and that's a sin. But just know that that choice is a sinful choice. Right. And I want my kids to be very clear on that. Like, you have a choice, sure, but to choose to not forgive is wrong. And sometimes we need time to do that, and that's okay. But we're fooling ourselves if we think that our unforgiveness is only affecting us.
Right.
Because
Yeah.
man, that affects, well, in this situation it affected people 500 years down the road.
Right.
And do you know how many years your unforgiveness is going to affect? No, you don't. Do you know how that's going to splash out onto other people?
Right.
No.
Right. And in the case of our lives, what you said's really the thing I want to key in on in these last couple minutes is harboring unforgiveness yourself is hurting you, but sometimes it feels good, so we put up with it because we feel like we're really making them pay by not offering them forgiveness. And of course, and we've shared this before, but one of Andrea's favorite sayings that I really like to repeat is poison is like...
No. Unforgiveness.
Sorry, unforgiveness is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. It's this delusion that we enter into in our minds where we feel like, hey, I'm going to hold this grudge and it's really going to hurt them. And meanwhile, they've moved on. And the only person it's hurting is you.
Or they just don't care nearly as much as you do.
That's right.
And
but
it's just a crazy cycle.
That's right. But beyond that, there are others around you, right? There's family. There's children. Man, there's nothing that makes me more sad when it comes to family dynamics than seeing kids who are taking up offense on behalf of their parents. And oftentimes I see this happening in divorced families where one or other of the spouses is just freely talking openly with anyone who will listen about how horrible the person's ex-spouse, separated spouse, current spouse, whatever is. And no regard for who's listening, and the little ears around the house are listening, and they're taking up offense on behalf of that spouse, either mom or dad, because they hear them saying these terrible things and they pick up that offense. And then guess what happens? They carry that unforgiveness around with regards to that spouse. And now not only are you drinking poison and expecting your ex-spouse to die, you're pouring poison down the mouth of your child and expecting your ex-spouse to die. And what will happen is, Lord willing, the Holy Spirit will get with you and you'll realize that forgiveness is the decision that we're asked to make as believers, and you'll offer forgiveness to your ex-spouse, even if there's not restoration in the marriage, which the Lord would want, and we pray that there would be, but even if there's not, or your current spouse, or whatever the case is, you'll offer forgiveness and give that burden over to the Lord, but guess who might not? Your child that's picked up this offense for you, or your mom or dad, right? Maybe you've ruined the relationship between your parents and that spouse, between your parents and that child, between your parents and whatever, because you simply allowed your unforgiveness and bitterness to splash out on everybody else. And then when you realized the forgiveness you needed to give, you didn't make a similar point of going to these other people in your life and going, hey, don't carry this around.
Or
right.
If it's your children, helping them work through forgiveness.
Right.
That needs to be a taught thing.
Right.
And if you're like, hey, I don't understand forgiveness. I don't know what forgiveness is. How do I do that? How do I even unload these unforgiveness issues or bitterness issues or whatever?
Right.
There's resources that are out there to help you do that in a biblical way.
Yep.
So one of those is Fresh Start, which is a great resource.
Yep.
Way of Agape is another one. We do
Heart Care.
We do something that's within a marriage mentoring relationship sort of thing called Heart Care. Those are all very similar. They have a little bit different avenues, but really it's all fairly similar because they're all Holy Spirit led.
Yeah, and you know what else you can do? Start by just praying.
Right.
Get on your knees before the Lord and just confess to the Lord, Lord, I've been holding on to this unforgiveness with regards to this person. I know it's wrong. Will you forgive me, and will you help me to forgive them?
But I think sometimes it's hard to even understand really what does forgiveness look like. what
Yeah,
is forgiveness
I think you can.
and
That's right.
how do I walk through that? But
Right.
for sure,
Right. Right.
praying about it is a great start. Yeah.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
And that unforgiveness stuff is there are not a lot of things in the Bible, decisions that one or two people made that last for 500 years and are recorded like that. But man, that's one of them. And that literally led to people dying. So, don't allow your unforgiveness and bitterness to splash over onto others and kill those relationships or kill their ability to relate to those people. And if you have in the past, offer forgiveness, offer forgiveness
Where you need to offer it.
Offer forgiveness where you need to offer forgiveness. Ask the Lord to forgive you for withholding that forgiveness. And then think about those people in your life that may have seen or either witnessed or picked up on your unforgiveness with regards to those people, and go to those people and say, hey, I was wrong in doing this. I don't take up that offense for me. Forgive me for displaying that in a way where you picked up on that, and let's offer forgiveness to this other person, both of us together, and not carry that around.
Yeah.
All right, guys, thanks so much for joining us for this Marriage Monday. I know forgiveness can be a difficult topic to deal with, so if you have questions, please feel free to put those in the comments below. You can comment on YouTube. You also are welcome to comment on our website. That is marriagebydesign.podbean.com. Each episode has its own individual site that you can click on, a page that you can click on, and then you can leave a comment right there. So I'd love to have you follow us on there, but more than anything else, thank you so much for joining us today. And remember, God is for your marriage. Have a great week.